Huggy Wuggy is one of the most important characters in all of Poppy Playtime, and today I wanted to figure out who or what even is Huggy Wuggy, all of the dark secrets that developers are hiding about him, and how he could even make an appearance in Chapter 3 and future chapters. So first, to keep things super simple, let's give the absolute basics. Huggy Wuggy, or Experiment 1170, was originally, as most other monsters, a toy inside of the Playtime Co factory, however was eventually developed into the large massive being we see today thanks to the Bigger Bodies Initiative, an initiative created by employee Harley Sawyer to create the toys into real beings and giving them jobs around the factory, with Huggy notably being the factory security guard. And in the factory, he was actually what the scientists, when creating him, called a nearly perfect experiment, because when testing the creation of the prototype Experiment 1006, they noted that he was far too smart and was also very violent, attacking and even killing the employees on multiple occasions. But in the same tape, they also praise Huggy Wuggy as the optimal experiment outcome, because like the prototype, he was very smart, but was also obedient to the employees' orders.
Huggy Wuggy remains the optimal outcome due to his sufficient intelligence paired with maximum obedience.
So not only was Huggy an intelligent and great security guard, but he also listened to what the employees said. A very stark contrast from what we saw in Poppy Playtime Chapter 1, where in our very first look at Huggy, he suddenly disappeared from his post before sneaking around the factory on our way and ambushing us out of nowhere through a dark hole, where after being chased through vents, we of course successfully kill him. However, in Chapter 2, he also makes his presence known again, both physically through the famous balls of fur and blood we can see in the water treatment sector, and non-physically through his own descendants like the mini Huggies, who are literally just baby Huggy Wuggies who come in all sorts of colors, and Kissy Missy, who according to the factory logs was created as the successor to Huggy Wuggy and as his better half. So this is all on the surface that we know about Huggy Wuggy. It's pretty simple. But if you're familiar with this channel, you'll know there is a whole lot of other secrets that tell us more about the story. For example, going into the very first trailer ever released for the game, hiding in the background, we can see a ton of mysterious text. And when brightening and pulling all of this text from the trailer, we get another script that references the prototype once again, where they describe him as an ideal experiment in his own way, specifically because, as they said, while he had a digestive system like the rest of the toys apparently did, he had no need for sustenance or needing to eat things like the rest of them. Meaning that, according to this, the prototype was seen as special for not needing to eat things in order to survive, while all of the other toys, including Huggy, had to, which we can actually see proof of in Chapter 1 all over the walls, where we could see writing presumably from Huggy and other spirits saying that they were so hungry for food. Most likely because when the employees went missing from the factory and they were left to fend for themselves, they were essentially being starved to death, most likely being the reason we see so many dead cat bees and other toys laying on the ground, since they were probably the weakest beings and were the easiest for the other toys to consume. But tying this back into Huggy Wuggy, this would actually explain why, instead of just attacking us the moment we saw him in Chapter 1 like what you would expect, Huggy throughout the chapter almost lures us deeper into the factory while spying on us before ambushing at the last second, similar to how a hungry predator would watch over and hunt their prey. And in fact, Huggy's hunger actually goes even deeper in his Chapter 3 VHS tape, where in the tape from this past January, Huggy is seen actually escaping and running away from the factory to go out into the forest, while the employees go out looking for him, only for multiple to die and go missing in the process. But the part that makes this tape the most interesting is that among all of this, we can actually see a couple dead animals laying on the ground, which, while on the surface it seems meaningless, this might be the most important detail of the entire tape. See, after watching this tape and seeing Huggy attack all the employees, it's easy to say that this was Huggy going through some sort of manic episode, running through and tearing apart everything in its path, with this animal just getting caught in the crossfire. However, a couple months ago, Mob Entertainment actually held themselves a live stream playing Project Playtime with some of their viewers, and while doing this, they actually slyly confirmed to us one very important but also minor detail midway through it, that of which being they confirmed to us that this animal that we see in the ground was not just killed by Huggy Wuggy, but specifically Huggy actually ate the creature, presumably along with eating the rest of the employees who also died. And this detail is actually what makes this tape the most important, because it makes you rethink about why Huggy was such a bloodthirsty monster when the employees had previously described him as obedient. It's because, as the walls in his vent scene say, he was so hungry and seemed to almost be controlled by his desire to eat things. things. I mean, it makes total sense when you think about it because Huggy is a massive monster, and like they already confirmed, Huggy along with the rest of the monsters outside of the prototype needed to eat things in order to survive, the same way you need to hit the like button on this video. And while this opens a whole can of worms to theories about what all these things could be eating behind the scenes, fixating back onto Huggy specifically, this whole idea of him needing food constantly in order to survive, having to savagely attack the people around him just to stay alive, started to also paint the picture for Poppy Playtime's other side title, Project Playtime, which is a game that for a while now has had a really confusing plot, as the game's main supposed story was that a bunch of resource extraction specialists were pulled from Playtime Co. and were put inside of the factory to collect toy parts while unknowingly being chased down by the three main toys, Huggy Wuggy, Mommy Longlegs, and Boxy Boo, trying to escape to the train station and leave. But why does this all happen? And why would the person who hired us in the tutorial, Leith Pierre, put us in these dangerous areas when he knew about all the toys in the factory? While we can theorize that all of the unnamed employees we play as in Project Playtime are probably meant to die, since in the tutorial and all of the other documents in Poppy Playtime, we know that the Playtime Co employees were extremely strict on privacy, even going as far as in the Project Playtime ARG creating Boxy Boo with the sole purpose of killing people who spoke out against the factory, hence his appearance in the game, seemingly suggesting that the employees who we play as in Project Playtime might have known some sort of secrets that they weren't supposed to, and were actually intentionally put here to die. In fact, we basically know this for a fact since in the cinematic trailer for Project Playtime, which we can assume is canon, we could see that after the players actually survive the toys in the factory and escape to the train, they are met with Boxy Boo waiting to eat them, proving they were never meant to actually survive. And as for explaining Mommy Longlegs and Huggy Wuggy, well, assuming that I'm right and the employees were put in here to be attacked by the toys, it seems pretty obvious that this resource extraction specialist job seems to be a hoax. And rather, the real plot for Project Playtime specifically seems to be masking the real purpose of the employees inside of it, and that is to be food for the other hungry toys like Huggy and Mommy and Boxy, who all need to be eating. And instead of Playtime Co feeding them some sort of Huggy Wuggy chow or something, they just decided to kill two birds with one stone and toss them in with the employees so they couldn't ever reveal what they might have seen. So Huggy's story seems relatively simple. He was created to be a security guard and was fed other employees in Project Playtime, with him eventually escaping the factory in his Chapter 3 VHS tape, going savage, eating anything he could find, including the other employees around him, which he then does to us in Chapter 1, where he attempts to attack us unsuccessfully. It all seems to make sense for Huggy. But while this is all cool information, speaking modernly, what about the upcoming third chapter? Where does he fit into the story? Well, I've actually already discussed the possibility of Huggy himself actually being in the third chapter in other videos, and to be honest, it doesn't really seem that likely. I mean, we basically already killed him in Chapter 1, and while there's hints to his existence, we only ever see his remains, and finally his head staked up in the Chapter 3 trailer, along with it being attached in the mechanical being here, so it's pretty safe to rule him out of Chapter 3. Or is it? Because as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, Huggy was considered to be one of their favorite experiments for his obedience and willingness to listen, which most likely is the reason why they've recreated Huggy on 3 separate occasions. Once with the mini Huggies in Wacka Wuggy, a second time with the Wuggies in Project Playtime, who are similar but a little bit different, along with, of course, Kissy Missy herself, who, while related to Huggy Wuggy in terms of size and appearance, is also similar in terms of her obedience, as in her restricted relocation tape, she is literally seen letting the employees tie her down and move her across the factory, displaying the same obedience they claimed with Huggy Wuggy. So throughout just 2 chapters, we have seen 4 different variations of Huggy. It honestly seems like whenever they need a new toy, they kind of just copy and paste what they did with Huggy Wuggy. He's almost the golden standard for what they want with the toys, since there's just so many versions of him. Which makes me honestly wonder, how many other Huggy Wuggies are there out there that we don't even know about? And more interestingly, why was the Huggy Wuggy we killed in Chapter 1 such an aggressive and tempered monster? Clearly, there is something missing with this Huggy, and while it's pretty safe to say this version of Huggy Huggy was killed long ago, who's to say there aren't even more versions of him hiding around the factory in other ways? And specifically with chapter 3, the main focus of the chapter, at least based on the trailer, seems to be the children in the play care and how they eventually went missing. And while, as we've discussed in other theories, we know that the children were eventually turned into toys, something that's always been on the back of my mind is whatever happened to the children who weren't yet turned into the monster and lived inside of the play care. And well, judged by in the final log made for the factory where we can hear scientists panicking and Huggy screams in the background attacking everybody, I can make a pretty safe guess as to where they all might have gone. And also, while maybe trivial, the developers themselves have even hinted at the idea of Huggy making some sort of return, as in some random Twitter post, if you look extremely closely on a whiteboard, you can see something that says Save Huggy 2023, possibly being them referencing an appearance of some sorts. So clearly, while Huggy on the surface is this popular, friendly, lovable toy, on the inside we could see, if anything, he has one of the most vicious, dark, and unexplainably savage-like need to eat and hunt people in the factory, leaving me with a ton of questions about him going into chapter 3, like whatever happened to his obedience. Which tells me that while Huggy might not necessarily be alive in chapter 3, clearly he has a story that has been untold, one that we will hopefully learn inside of chapter 3. But while I don't think he's going to physically be present in chapter 3, there's another character from the first couple chapters that nobody is talking about who seems to have an even darker backstory, who also seems like they're going to be in chapter 3 and nobody is paying attention to it. But we will have to save that theory until later this week. For now, check out this beefy theory video explaining the dark cult of Poppy Playtime chapter 3. Subscribe if you enjoyed, and peace out, guys.